Are you tired of losing to a weaker comp but not understanding why? Did that Aatrox bring your Ashe in, even though there were units seemingly further away? All sorts of things can happen when you position it correctly or not, and learning how to adapt to each of these sets, champions, and trait mechanics is key to your success in the rank ladder. Hey everybody, and welcome back to another Pro Guides video. Today we're going to be talking about one of the most underappreciated actions that you need to take in TFT, and that is positioning. We talked about it in set 3, and many of the main principles will be reiterated here. However, positioning changes depending on the set, and while the AI behaviors don't really change over much, adapting to specific mechanics like Aatrox and Azir requires specific discussion. So today we'll be talking about some basic AI behaviors and then going into how you should position in set 4. Before we dive right on in, I just want to let you guys know that we have a Discord community and a new subreddit that is growing really fast. We have all you to thank for that, and we really want to continue building our community and hoping you guys be a part of it. Be sure to check the link in the description down below. See you guys there. Positioning is the only way to influence the AI of the game into doing what you want it to do. Who your units are going to attack, which way they will move, even if they cast their spells quicker, can be affected by how you place them on the board. Let's look at the basic behaviors that the AIs in TFT engage in. Like all good battle maniacs, units in TFT hit whatever is closest to them. That goes for range units as well, but it only concerns auto attacks. If units are not in the range, they will move towards the closest unit. When there are 2 units in range, who they go for is random. For example, an infiltrator jumping between 2 units in the back has a 50-50 chance on hitting either of them. Units in TFT have unit collision, so they will go ahead and move around the others to hit their intended target. Taunted units are no different, but if there are too many taunted units, some may have to wrap around, and if the taunt wears off, may attack something else at that point. Zizirot Portal is a good example of this when placed on a solo frontliner with too many opponents around them. Some of the units have spell-altering targeting, like Talon, besides the initial target. You cannot throw him into a clump of enemies that you want dead, since after his first jump, he will follow his spell-targeting paradigm instead of the default AI. What can we do about those basic behaviors though? Positioning in set 4. Set 4 has brought many nice unique mechanics both for traits and champions, so let's go ahead and explore them. Trait-specific positioning. Exile goes without saying, as you need to position them apart from the others. It seems obvious, but this can be really annoying to position around if you're playing both Yasuo and Yone, as that board suddenly gets smaller since you need them to not touch anything. One of the better solutions is to position them like this, even in the front line if the opponents and their items allow for it. That way you can have most of the middle and all of the back free to maneuver around the rest of your comp. Dazzlers. Dazzlers are a big one, though it is kind of also champion dependent. Aside from Morgana, who has a random spell targeting paradigm, the other 3 have more specific ones. However, you still want to position them in ways where their spells get the most, dare I say, dazzling effect, besides their own effects. In short, you want them to hit as many opponents as possible, and especially in Ezreal's case, as many allies as possible. Corners are usually okay for Lux, whereas Lissandra is better served diagonally from the highest attack champion, which is usually the carry. That way she can hit everything in between, as well as intended target. Similarly for Ezreal, since he will be hitting the highest attack speed, a diagonal hit will hit a fair number of allies and enemies. Assassins are a staple in TFT, whatever their name. The jump to the back does not really change and is always something to guard against. As an assassin player yourself, remember to reposition your assassin carry or all your assassins if you prefer, targeting squishy units and getting the most out of their spells. For example, you want Pyke to be close to a corner unit, as he will traverse most of the distance and then send the most units as he leaves them. Alternatively, Talon wants to go to a squishy target first to start his resetting as fast as possible. Emperor is a really interesting trait. Yes, we know it's also a champion, but it's a trait that gives Azir his soldiers, so we'll be discussing it here. Azir's soldiers are an amazing counter positioning mechanic that serves multiple purposes. You can use them to bolster your front line and stop any gaps for opponents with little to no backline access, or position them in the corners to bait abilities like Aatrox's spell, so like this. Use them to bait attacks from ranged carries moving towards the cornered position. How does this work? You just place your soldiers right here. And as an opposing carry finishes off your front line and moves towards your backline, if they are diagonally positioned from you, they will target the soldiers first, while your backline targets them, giving you a small advantage in targeting. This is more of a niche tactic, but it also works really well against Ashe, as well as Jinx and Jhin to the extent. Keeper kind of goes without saying, and they need a bunch up. However, remember that keepers give each other the biggest shield. Try to always have keepers buff each other and be less baited by trying to be uber optimized and buff everyone. In general, shielding the frontline usually gives you more value, as the backline shields are useless outside of the assassin or early AoE comps. An example would look like this. You notice Azir and Riven buffing each other, and since we're worried about assassins, we give the backline some shielding as well. Otherwise, we could move Azir towards the front a little bit more and double buff the front line. Shade is really similar to assassins, albeit with one small difference. Due to their instant positioning and teleport, they appear to be quicker, making them slightly more vulnerable to counter positioning. They will drop aggro due to their trait, but also entering a clump space where they might have to be targeted too quickly if nothing else in the range is dangerous. Make sure that you either put meaty targets in front of wherever they're going, or send them towards easier opponents. That's it for the trait specific stuff. The rest of the traits don't really have any special positioning requirements, so let's go ahead and jump into the champions. Champion specific positioning. We will not be covering every single champion, bunching up some with the other categories that merit similar positioning. For example, starting off with Maokai, Sylas, Nunu, Garen, and other melee frontliners, well, their positioning is the frontline, dealing damage, CCing or soaking damage, and depending on their spell, they could do this really well. The exception to this rule is when you want them further back to intercept any pesky assassins. Be aware though that if your opponent counters your counter position, then you might get wrecked big time. Next are the champions you want to be hit so they get one or more spells off quickly as possible, since they have high utility AoE spells. We're talking about Sejuani, Cassiopeia, Hecarim if he's chosen and itemized, Riven, Annie, Jax, Aatrox, Shen, and Irelia. All of those champions have high impact spells like Sejuani's Stun or Cassio's Petrify, or strong self-utility spells like Hecarim and Riven who can almost be immortal. For those champions, you want them to be in the front line. For the high impact spell ones, they can be even a solo frontline, especially with Gargoyle's Stoneplate. A Sejuani like that can cast 2 or 3 times before she dies, making a huge difference. For the Hecarims and Rivens of the world, solo frontline might be acceptable, but it's generally better to have some company, as they need their spells to go off and continue to go off to sustain themselves. They don't CC the opponent, so they can't really stagger the damage they receive like Sejuani and Cassio. Ahri used to be in this category, but since the spirit went out of flavor and her HP got nerfed, frontline Ahri with GA is both not really worth it and unreliable. Next up, you have the ranged carries. This includes Jinx, Jhin, Ashe, Vayne, Kindred, and Kalista. Their positioning might seem obvious, just corner them and put stuff around them, you'll say. And for the most part, you'll be right. But what we want to focus here is which corner. You really want to pay attention to which unit will be your carry's first target, especially since there's a high possibility of some sort of assassin shenanigans with both Shade and Assassins existing. You want to be able to kill their carry first, and then move on to the Assassins and Shades around them, killing them before they get killed themselves. So be mindful of placing your bunch up carry in the side with squishier opponents. Alternatively, you can even push them forward a little bit, or even frontline them in extreme full backline assassins kind of comps like Spirit Shade used to be. We didn't forget about the melee carries. This category includes Sett, Warwick, Yone, Yasuo, Lee Sin, and Wukong. These fellas are fairly tanky by themselves, or they have traits that make them tankier on top of everything. However, you will rarely frontline any of them, at least not alone and depending on their items and your comp. All of these guys are usually second line material, but be careful of how much they will have to walk to reach a target. For example, if you're facing a solo frontline opponent, this is really bad positioning. Your Sett and your Warwick will have difficulty targeting and reaching the solo frontline between your Sejuani and Thresh, resulting in them missing out a couple of seconds of the fight. In situations like these, you want to put either both of them in the further parts of the backline, like this. Or you can even put them in the front line like this. This should allow them to even go for the backline if there are units closer to the solo frontliner, or pincer the opponent's frontline and split damage, thus lasting longer. Always be aware that Sett is fairly a bad solo frontliner specifically, since he will be often interrupted with not even being able to cast his ultimate, dropping below 50% and then running off to exercise. Katarina is an interesting champion meriting her own sort of mention. Generally, it's best to put her in the middle of the map so as to hit the most amount of units possible. If the opponents have a clump, however, it's preferable that you land on the outside and ult everyone there. Be mindful that Katarina has a lot of mana to gain until she ults and is fairly squishy. It's important that the opposing carries will be sidetracked by the front line, as well as some other assassins dropping closer to them than Katarina and being the sacrificial lamb. Kennen is another champion that is a little bit weird in his positioning as another high impact ultimate, but on a really squishy target. You usually will see that the Yordle ninja in the second line, but putting them in the front line with the GA if you can spare it might make some decent damage and CC, especially if you run ninja. General tips. The most important thing to do in order to boost your positioning in the game is to read the tooltips for every champion in the game. Combined with your understanding of them, it shouldn't take too long and will solidify your ideas for applying those spell targeting paradigms to your positioning in game. Returning to default positioning and switching stuff around randomly is a good habit to get into as well to help confuse your opponents. You shouldn't really use it in lower elos as people don't scout as often or as well, and you might outplay yourself by trying to mind game them. However, do use it the higher you go, especially if you notice someone's positioning is against you specifically. Make sure that you use the ghost trick for the last second repositioning by picking up your champion and not putting one down while pressing the scouting hotkeys to check your opponents. Then at last, click the spacebar and go back to your board and drop the champion where you want them to be. Positioning is really tightly bound to scouting and countering your opponents, but even on its own, with minimal scouting, it will give you an edge that other players don't possess, catching them by surprise with your frontline Cassiopeia and then sending their whole team. Anyways, that's gonna be it for this video. As always, feedback is appreciated, so hit us in the comments. If you like the video, hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Now get out there and farm some LP using what you learned today. Stay healthy, stay safe, and have a wonderful day. Peace.